Hi, welcome to everyone joining. I'm super excited to have you guys as you join. Let's get some engagement and just let me know in the chat box whether you're a high school student, a college student, or you're a professional. I see some of our scholars have joined. I'm super excited to have you guys too. Nice. First year college student. Med student. Ooh. Awesome, thank you. And I forgot to share this with our panelists. We had over 50 people register, so now we should expect a pretty good size of attendees. Thank you everyone for joining. And we're just having people put in the chat if they're a high school student, a college student, or a professional. And we'll give everyone a minute to join. Professionals in the group, yeah. College students. You guys are getting towards your finals, aren't you? Yeah, it's November. It's almost that time. Cool. I'm gonna let a few more people, I'm gonna keep letting people join. As we wait, I mean, panelists, how are you guys feeling today?
Feeling good. It's my finals period pretty much this week and next week, so pretty busy.
Yeah. I always try to, be less talkative to students during this time. I'm like, you need your quiet time. You need to focus, because I know me, I would easily get distracted. I was not a good finals person. I couldn't focus on one task for that long. Awesome. How's everybody else doing? I mean,
I'm pretty good. I just hate winter when it becomes darker earlier, so you just feel like, oh, I gotta get the day over with. It's just so you just feel mopey sometimes, especially the raining the week. So yeah.
Yeah, it's been really weird weather. Like it's weirdly warm, even though I expect it to be cold and damp since it's so rainy. That's weird. Okay. I think I'm gonna give another minute or so for people to join, and then But Louise, how's your day going?
I mean, it's going. I have the week off this week. I start my new engineering job on Monday.
Oh, okay, fun. I'll have to ask you more later. That's cool. Awesome. All right, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. So this, for all our attendees, this webinar is being recorded. So if you do miss a part, if you end up getting kicked out, that's all right. You will be forwarded a recording of this later. So, and that goes for everyone that registered and wasn't able to attend. I know quite a few people registered and weren't able to attend, so they can get the recording later. Awesome. Well, I'll go ahead and get started now. So, welcome everyone to the Dismantling Immigrant Parent Myths About Education in America panel discussion. I'm Nancy Ruto. I'm the Career Services and Internship Program Coordinator at the Page Education Foundation. I coordinate Accelerate, our internship program. college coffee and conversations, our mentorship program, and our monthly professional webinar series, including this webinar, which I was more than excited to put together. I aim to connect our scholars to career paths that enrich their lives and benefit their communities and validate their hard work they put into their education. So this is, something I'm very passionate about, to connect that education to their career path. This webinar was made possible by the Page Education Foundation, of course. The foundation is a nonprofit organization that supports Minnesota students of color pursuing their dreams of post-secondary education by providing financial support. This webinar is part of the Scholar to Student series, Student to Scholar series. This series is aimed at easing the transition from young student to scholar. If you want to learn more about our scholarships and eligibility, please visit our website at www.page-ed.org. At the foundation, more than half our college students are children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. The PDF staff is also 70% first or second generation immigrants. We often talk about our students and about our immigrant parent expectations for education and how it compares with our reality in the school systems. Our team decided to bring that conversation to the forefront to help first generation students of color coming from similar backgrounds navigate their higher education experience once they enter college. As children of immigrants, we receive advice on making the most out of our education from multiple sources, with the goal of a stable career by the time we graduate. In this webinar, we will discuss what advice has worked to students' advantage, break down educational myths, and share insights that lead to a fulfilling career. Each of our panelists today have a different background, but they can all share in the difficulties of navigating the American education system. I'll have them each introduce themselves with their education background and current role if they have one. And I will start first with our youngest here, Amira.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Amira Laditon, pronouns she, her. I'm currently a junior at Carleton College as a biology major and Africana Studies minor on the pre-medicine track.
Still needed to say. And then I will have Winnie introduce herself next.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel. My name is Winnie Lotto. I use she, her pronouns. And my education background, I graduated from St. Olaf College with a vocal performance major. So I was a music person. And right now, I currently work for a company called EAB as the Senior College Success Manager for our program that's called College Greenlight, which focuses on supporting students from underrepresented backgrounds who are interested to pursue college. And so it's a pleasure to be with you all today.
Thank you, Winnie. And then I will have Luis introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Luis Romero. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a recent graduate from the University of St. Thomas. I graduated with a Bachelor in Science and Mechanical Engineering. And yeah, I'm just excited to talk to you all.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I'll have Payong, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Payong Zhang. I graduated from Hamline University in 2013 with a Bachelor in Business Management, and then went for a Master's in Educational Leadership in 2013. I was a Page alum, or I was in Page throughout my college year, so I was just very thankful for the scholarship, the support, the mission of what they do, and just Alan Page and Diane for sure. They're just very lovely, and so. Currently, right now in my role, I am the TRIO Upper Bound Director at Metropolitan State University, where we are a federally funded program. We serve students who are low-income first gen, and our whole goal is to really help students graduate from high school and enter college and graduate from college. So that's a big mission of ours here, to just make sure that students are graduated from college when they're there. So nice to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. And then last but not least, we have Andy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andy, he, him pronouns. I graduated in 2021 from St. Cloud State. I studied political science and international relations. Currently, I work in a nonprofit. I community action partnership for Ramsey and Washington County. My role with them is more community building and advocacy building with our clients and our families we work with. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome, thank you. And then in the background, you'll see Candace, and she is our Service to Children Outreach Coordinator at the foundation, who is helping with the questions and everything in the background. So she'll be there too. But thank you guys so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to hear all of your input. And just to share why I'm passionate about this discussion, for me and myself, I was born in Kenya, raised by Kenyan parents, moved here to the US with the goal of getting a good education via the education system and graduating from college and getting a good job. And, that was my parents' goal for me. So this topic is really close to me, and I love discussing it. We discuss it in the office all the time. And so this is just very exciting for me to do. Our discussion today will begin with pursuing education, and then we will also talk about how that leads to a career towards the end of our discussion. If you have specific questions for our panelists, feel free to drop them in the group chat section of our webinar, and we will try to answer them in the end. You can also put them in the Q&A section. And again, Candace will help coordinate those questions and make sure they get answered. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into our first question, and I want every one of our panelists to answer this one. And we will start the same way we did introductions. I'll start with Amira. The question is, what did your parents share about what they told you about education?
Yeah, for me, well, I was born here in the US, but both my parents came to the US around the 1990s from Nigeria. So a lot of the aspects for them when it came to telling me aspects of like why education is important was more so that education is key to doing anything in America. So when they came here, it was to find this sort of American dream, as they call it. And a lot of things that they put upon me is just being passionate about getting a college degree and just pursuing education in order to further myself, in order to get a job, and then to also then inherently help my family as well.
Thank you. And then I will have Winnie also answer this question.
Yes. So my family came to the US in 1997. I was born in Cairo, Egypt, and my family is from South Sudan. And so growing up in the US, my parents didn't have the opportunity to even make it to college. And so my dad barely has a high school education, as well as my mom. And I know that my mother had some interest in becoming a teacher. And with 5 children, obviously, there's a lot of caretaking that needed to happen with all of us. But my parents really valued education because they saw it as the golden ticket in the US. And so they would only just encourage us to pursue our education and making sure that we have good grades, making sure, we graduate from high school, go on. And ultimately, the big dream is to have a big job and then be able to support your family afterwards. So that's what I grew up knowing from my parents.
Awesome. Thank you. And then next we're going to Louise. What did your parents have to say?
My dad is from Guatemala and my mom's from Mexico. So growing up, they really saw education as a blessing because my dad would always just go find whatever and try to learn it, even if it wasn't in school. And my mom didn't have that much of an education. I think she made it max like 6th grade back in Mexico. So she always saw it as a blessing and would always tell us to like strive for what we want to do. And even if it doesn't work out the first time, keep going. Because at the end of the day, education is something that experience nobody can take away from you. Like whether or not you finish, doesn't matter if you finish or you don't. It's the experiences that come from that.
Nice. All right, I'm hearing a theme here already. Thank you, Louise. And then we're going to go to Payang.
Yeah, it's so great to hear everybody. And like you said, Nancy, like the themes coming out, right? I think for me, very similar. I think my family, my parents have always placed an emphasis on education and how like education can open the doors, right? And allow you to do things and learn and be something, be someone. Coming here as refugees, my parents did not have a chance at education. They were building a family already. I think my dad went to Harding High School, if you know where that is. He went there, he graduated from there. But, being in high school and being a parent is so different. And so I think for him, there was struggle. Or like today, even today, my parents are, they're not, the highest is a high school grad, right? And a GED. And so with that knowledge, I think it's so important for me to be, for them to, push me, and for that motivation for me to be, to go get my higher education, right? And to make sure that I am doing things that I love, and be successful. So it's not just for me, but also for my parents.
Yeah, all right. I'm catching some questions I want to ask you, but of course I want to ask Andy his input as well.
Yep, I mean, pretty similar theme with what everyone was talking about. But one thing that my parents really pushed is the dynamics between career and education. I think in some situations, families, parents are pushing you to do a certain job, like a doctor or engineer. But my parents weren't really; they were more interested in just education, like reaching the highest education, in whatever field that may be. That was something that it didn't matter to them. So education, it didn't matter where they went, or what you did with it, as long as you get the highest education you can. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, of course. Like there's this common theme, we're hearing here just to point it out that, education is key for that good job. Education is key to, make something of yourselves. And we hear that a lot from our parents. And well, that education comes with a lot of expectations as well. You're not just supposed to go to school, you're supposed to do well at it. You're supposed to excel in it. I think I can speak for most of us here that, we were expected to have pretty high grades while we're in school. At least I can speak for myself. So what exactly were the expectations around education that were put on you? And was it encouraging or discouraging for you? Who would like to answer that first? Uh, if Andy or Amira wants to answer, go right ahead.
Yeah, similar to what you were kind of touching on with just like this concept of high achievement and performing well. Those were the expectations put on me, because conversations that I've had with my parents have more so been that if they were receiving this high achievement and level of status in like their home country, they would also want to see the same for their children coming to the US. So those expectations were more so getting good grades or just being like kind of like this said perfect student in terms of at least academic expectations. So at least for me, that was definitely, it could be encouraging and discouraging at times, because it was more so the pressure for like perfectionism or wanting to always have all A's. And I feel like that mindset can just follow you for a long time. So like now entering college, being at a school where I feel like I'm always challenged and I don't feel like I'm getting the perfect grades that I want, then in that case, it's very discouraging for me to just see that I'm not performing as well as I'm used to performing. And just knowing that if I want to have those conversations with my parents, I don't feel comfortable doing so, just because of like that discouragement or just like the disappointment I'll see not having like the high level of achievement that I've had before.
And thank you for that. And that's so true. I saw Andy had a hand raised. Did you want to contribute?
Yeah, just a little history. So I am the youngest of 8 children. I'm also the first one to go to college out of high school. So there was definitely a lot of expectations, being the youngest and in my family, with my parents not having a direct education, being refugees. But it definitely was discouraging in the beginning. But as you had these conversations with your siblings and the experiences, and you're realizing the trauma and the experiences your siblings and your parents are going through, it definitely becomes an encouraging point, as you get into it and as you get into like the work and the school and everything the day to day. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's true. And Amira touched on this a little bit on how it can, like, it is encouraging to have those high expectations. It makes you want to aim higher. But in what ways would you say it was discouraging to have those super high expectations?
Is it
I
back
mean,
on me?
Yeah.
No, or is it to someone else? Oh, me?
If Winnie wants
Oh,
to add, I saw Winnie take her mic off, so
yeah.
Zach, go right ahead.
I'm happy to add, but Andy, if you wanted to share the for you, I can share similar sentiments with everyone here in that, there are these high expectations that our parents had for us in terms of, you want to do well. But I think for my father, he didn't understand what the education system was giving out to me. And so even if I got a B and I got an A, I was excited because my dad was like, hey, this is good grades. But then the school that I went to, B necessarily the best thing. And so I had to always be in this conflicting fight with myself, but also others around me, because I knew I still wasn't achieving high expectations internally within the school, but to my father it definitely seemed like I was doing a pretty good job. So it was weird to have that dynamic of like, oh, my dad sees that I'm doing a really good job, but the school that I'm at doesn't see me as someone who's excelling in the way that others might have expected.
Interesting. I wonder if that's, true for any other panelists. I can speak for myself that that wasn't true for me. A minus was not cutting it. My parents kept expecting more and more, saying, like, we've been through education back home and here, and we know it's better here in the US, so you should do better. Would anyone agree or disagree with Winnie's experience? Or, well, can anyone connect with it? Yeah, go ahead, Pam.
I think for me, I think to not go away from the topic, but I think a lot of the time with the high expectations, right? I think for us internally, it's for me, I guess through my experience, it was a fear of failure, right? It's like they're setting this high expectation. I'm scared that I might not meet it because I don't know, it's scary, right? And when you're the first to do things, when you're the first in your family to go to college, when you're first, you are setting the path, right? You're trying to set the path for your family, and sometimes you're scared to disappoint them, right? And you sit with that, and sometimes I feel like we think we're alone in this journey, right? We think we're alone in this journey. We think we're alone in trying, failure, right? And then I think imposter syndrome, that comes up a lot too. And so I think for me, it's like the expectations, like, you will go to school. What was really nice with my parents is that because they did not know, right? Like what this really entails, they kind of just left me alone, because I was fine, right? I was finding ways to navigate. I was in trio programs myself, so I was finding ways to navigate. And so they pretty much left me alone. But I think that for that, it was helpful, because then they weren't like helicopter parents, right?
Mhm.
They were all in my business. But um to your point, I think a lot of it comes with this feel of failure, right? Like, am I meeting their expectations? Where is the benchmark? Are we the ones setting the benchmark, or are they really setting the benchmark for us, right?
Yeah.
So those are some of the dilemmas during that time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, shout out Trio Works.
Yes, I love that. Especially those, support groups like Trio, like they really do help you in that transition, especially to have other people to talk to about it, especially your age. It validates your experience, and it also just motivates you to continue forward in a positive way and not such a fear of failure way, which I love that you touched on. And you touched on imposter syndrome. I'm not going to talk about that yet because that is a question that I really want to ask later. But thank you so much. I want to get to my next question, which I'm, really excited to ask, because we're talking about, doing well in this education system, and most of the time that means, being that good student that's sitting quietly and listening, and you never want to have a bad report from your teacher that you're not participating, or, you're not doing as the teacher asks. So my question is, how did your parents encourage you to challenge concepts and authority figures like teachers?
I can answer on this one. So I
All
remember
right.
growing up, my mom, like, she didn't know English, and she still doesn't really know English that well. But she would always ask me if I had my homework done on time. And I'd be like, oh, here's my homework. It's done. And she would see me struggling to do my homework, but I would get it done. And then there was a couple times where my teacher said they lost my homework. And I remember my mom was so mad because she was like, did you turn in your homework or did you not? And I was like, Mom, you saw me turn in my homework. I gave it to her. I remember vividly giving it to her. And she would always go in and argue with the teacher and be like, he turned in his homework. I saw him do it. You're either going to give him the grade or because he's not redoing it. I saw him do it. She would always be the one challenging my teachers or like my authority figures for me to like get the good grade when I put in the work, because at the end of the day, nobody's going to advocate for you. And that's like how I started advocating for myself, looking for help on campus, looking for people to help me through difficult times.
Nice. Okay, that's an interesting take. I don't think I've ever heard anyone heard or say that their parents, would come in and vouch for them. Is that is experience that's similar for other panelists, or was your experience different? Whoever wants to jump in next. Go right ahead, Amir.
Yeah, I feel like my experience was definitely the opposite. I guess talking to authority figures like teachers, professors, etc. I mean, how I've learned it to be is that they were like my elders, someone that's older than me, that I should always respect them. So it was never some sort of challenge. So even if I felt like I wanted to challenge the teacher, if I were to like kind of like have an attitude and like my parents were to find out, then it'd become like this whole thing where I was being disrespectful to someone that's my authority figure that's supposed to be like a mentor or teacher to me. So definitely at times, I think with this mindset, it was just harder for me to be like, if I had a question, or like things I'm confused about in class, especially in high school, I just wouldn't ask and try to figure it out myself. Just with that, I guess with that concept in mind.
Yeah, I see Winnie nodding a lot. Did you want to add?
I mean, Amira said it perfectly. I mean, there's no way to describe that. Respect was the basis of how I existed in front of my parents, basis of how I existed when I walked into the world, because it was a reflection of them as well. If I were to be disrespectful, or if I were to, be disruptive within a class, it would ultimately be my fault. And that's not why I'm like in school. That's what my dad would always say. It's like, this is not why you're in school. You're not in school to have fun. You're not in school to, make friends. You are in school to be educated. And so disrupting that from the like mindset that my father had actually became a bigger problem within the household than it did actually for the teachers and the school. So I totally agree with Amira.
Interesting. So, talking about, this, not being able to advocate for yourself in the classroom, unlike Luis, that, their parent or his parent helped him advocate for himself when the teacher lost his homework. Many immigrant students are advocates for their family, for their parents. They speak both languages most times. So I'm curious how, if I can start with Louise, how did that training in advocacy help you in life in college?
It was more so just being confident in who I was. Like, I mean, there was times where there was imposter syndrome where I was like, oh, they are smarter than me. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it was always that balance between like me being confident enough to go ask for help, but at the same time not wanting to because I was afraid of looking dumb compared to my other classmates in university. So it just was more so like finding a balance between advocating for myself and not fearing what other people thought of me.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm hearing that. And now I want to pass it to Andy as well, because knowing Andy is the youngest, did you see yourself having to advocate for your family being the youngest, or was that different for you?
Most definitely. I think you had being the youngest, you had I had to kind of carve my way into that respect ideal, being in among family elders and like experience tends to like be the one that is the one that speaks for the family, the one that speaks for everything. But carving my way, I actually got the opportunity going to school, being the youngest one, but also going to school and proving to my family that I'm the expert in my field and whatever I do. Being the advocate myself, like that really helped me become who I am today. Like now my parents, since I studied political science, my parents are talking to me about politics. They're asking me where certain things are happening and why things are happening around the world. I get that little
Yeah.
more respect and experience. Yeah.
Yeah, because being in your role, of course, your parents are going to come to you with
Yeah.
things that, are part of your role. Of course, you know about it. I was once a math teacher, so of course, when someone had math issues, we went to Nancy to help them solve. I helped my siblings with math homework. They didn't even go to my parents. They're like, nope, she's the one who got the degree in it. Let her go help you. So yeah, of course, even as the youngest, because I think there's a lot of talking about the eldest, being the number one person to speak for the family, but also it does fall on the other children as well. So I love to hear that. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add within, talking about being advocates for their family? If not, I'm happy to then talk about, not only just being advocates for your family, you have to navigate both cultures as well, both cultures and both languages a lot of the times. Um, for some, their parents don't speak English, so then having to speak for them is an interesting challenge. But also some of us, our parents, did speak English. Thankfully that did make it a little easier on me, for myself. And then talking about language within the household. So I can speak for myself in saying my parents spoke both English, Swahili, and Kipsigis, but within the house we mostly spoke Kipsigis between our parents, and 90% of the time I want to say English. And it's differed between households. So my question is, did your parents encourage bilingualism or one language over the other? If we can start with Winnie, since Winnie is nodding.
I'm a nodder, so I'm gonna have to stop nodding.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I will say is that my family always encourages bilingualism, and I think what was challenging the most is that in school, people didn't expect for me to be someone who spoke a different language. I think a lot of people had this impression that because I came to the US when I was 3, I still should have an accent and that I should just be a little bit different. But I mean, my dad always wanted us to be able to speak, our native language. And I think what's important is that we speak it more now as adults than we did as children. And so I think the duality of understanding your language, but then recognizing, there are phrases you can't say in English in the way that you can say in your traditional or native language. And so language is a big part of the way that we communicated, and it still is. And so I do appreciate my dad making sure that he spoke to us in Arabic, and I just would translate for him at times, or just have to be like, actually that's not how you say it, but let me put in another syllable for you. But yeah, it was really great being able to continue speaking the language.
Yeah, being able to speak both is just, it's really such a blessing. I wish I could say I'm fluent in both, but I cannot for myself. But Payong, I want to hear from you as well. Was bilingualism big for you?
Yeah, it is. I think that for my family, because we are refugees, right? It's like we cannot go back to our country. Like you just can't go back, right? So you have to assimilate. You have to learn this language. And I think for growing up in a household where my parents, they know zero English. Like they had to pack whatever bag, little belonging they have and get on the bus and then get on the plane and just come, right? And so for them, it was a struggle. And for me, it was struggle. I remember the first few years of my years of life, the first 1 to 3 years, and I cannot speak English. I don't know what people are saying to me, right? And I recall that I was like, how do I even know how to brush my teeth? I remember going to the preschool and Head Start, right? I remember going to Head Start and they were brushing our teeth and they're teaching us this. And I was like, oh, are we playing? Because you don't understand. And then I don't think I have a real full understanding until at least third grade, right? About English and why it's important. And even today, it's a struggle because you don't have that English from your parents. They're not teaching you all these English words, right? And so with that in mind, I'm always conscious about, hey, making sure I read, right? Making sure I'm picking up vocabulary, because that's very important, especially in higher education. You got to know what you're talking about, right? And so I think that although with my family, with my parents, they encourage it, but in a way they kind of don't or cannot help me, right? And then with that being said, I have to make sure that I find ways to really help myself so that I am versed and then the language, and making sure that I know what I'm talking about, and all those great definitions. So I think having that helps my confidence and boosts me, to be where I'm at today.
Yes, and that kind of ties into, my second part of this question, which how did it affect your confidence and communication skills? And Winnie already touched on this, on, being able to communicate in both languages. And it is a struggle at first, especially if your parents aren't able to help you. It's really hard at first, but then the confidence you have as an adult, how did you navigate, from that transition of, learning it as a kid and struggling, and then as an adult, would you say your confidence grew? Would you say it was important for your character building?
I can say something about that.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just want to first validate the students and the people that do struggle with trying to obtain 2 languages in a household. I, for one, am one of them where I don't really speak the best Hmong. because of the effort to push English in our household because that was the way out, you know. But it really like growing up, you know, um, really like you when you get put into that situation, well, I'm losing my thought here now, but I'm getting there. Yes, when you get put in that situation, you really wait. Why
You
am I
rise to
losing?
the occasion, don't you? You get put in this situation of like, well, you gotta learn. Like, there's really no
Yeah,
other
yeah.
option.
I mean, really, and then it also it puts guilt sometimes on you that you're not the best in either or. But that's where when you learn it, then you're like understand that this is okay to have this understanding that you're not best in both, but that you're able to work on it and you gotta grow. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
don't know, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I totally understand what you're talking about. I also want to ask Louise, because Louise mentioned, that your mom didn't speak much English. So how is that for you in that household? Was then, English stress for you, Louise?
So I remember when we were younger, they would push to learn English more so. They would try to teach us English. But once we got older, they would be more so, okay, so once you're outside of the house, you're not going to speak Spanish as much. So, focus on English. So usually I would speak English outside. And then when I got home, it would just be Spanish. So I would have both at the same time. So my mom they would always talk to us, how was our day and everything like that. Like just small conversations. And we would just talk in Spanish the whole time. I remember when my brother was growing up too, they would get mad at us for talking in English because they were afraid of us losing the ability to speak Spanish or like having broken Spanish or whatever it was, because they always knew that knowing both languages would be more beneficial than just knowing one.
Yeah, yeah. That's the common theme is, bilingualism, trilingualism, knowing more languages, the better your communication skills. And I, of course, want to ask Amira, what her experience is as well.
Yeah, it was a very opposite for me. My parents didn't really encourage me to speak their native languages, more so to speak English. So for me growing up, when my parents were at like work majority of the time of my childhood. So it was my grandma. My grandma lived with us. She didn't speak any English. So then for me, at that point in time, until like around age like 7, she was speaking like specifically Yoruba or Yoruba. So then she would speak that to me, and that's all I would hear growing up. But then after she like didn't live with us anymore, it was just with my parents. Like they encouraged speaking English way. So I just lost all of it. So for me, I think now looking back now, and now I want to like try to relearn language. It's really hard for me to like kind of get that experience or have like that be a pivotal part of my life when it's currently not. So I think for me, in terms of like my confidence communication skills through school, it hasn't affected me as much through school, but outside of school, at least with like talking to family friends and having those conversations. So like, for example, I'm talking to another peer of mine that my parents have introduced me to that does speak they're also their native language, and they're like, oh, how come how come you can't do this, how come you can't do that? And it's like then it kind of becomes like you start that dialogue where I didn't learn it because of you, but then I don't want to start an argument or anything. So I think for me, it's just been hard in terms of just now like recognizing that and trying to like bring that piece back with you as you get older.
Yes, yes. And I relate with that 110%. Even though my parents spoke 3 languages, did they want to share the other 2 with me? Not really. No. As an adult, I'm now able to look at this from my dad's perspective. As a kid, when we first came to the US, they did speak to us in Kipsigis, but not very much up until, age 5 or 6, when we really started to get into, kindergarten, first grade, really get into education. The issue arose where we'd go to school and they'd ask, oh, do you speak another language at home? And we said yes. And then they assumed we couldn't speak very much English. So then me and my sister were put into ESL classes. Even though we did know English, we just maybe spoke with a slight accent because of what we learned from our parents. And also they learned British English, which didn't help very much because then I'd be like, oh, I do know English. And they're like, your vocabulary is very weird though. And I'm like, well, I learned it from my parents. And so for my dad, he, wanted us to get the best education. He's like, ESL is not it. You don't need it. I want you in the higher level courses. So he stopped us from speaking Kipsigis at home, just so we get accustomed to English. And that if anyone asked, we spoke English. So he of course wasn't always there to speak for us. So saying that you're only able to speak English with, you know, to the officials, he felt better that way. So in his defense, I understand looking back why he did that. Now as an adult, am I upset that I don't understand my native language? So yeah, I am. I can't speak to my grandma without the help of my mom or my cousin or somebody. Like I can maybe say a few phrases and I can understand her, but I can't speak back. And you know, it was that fear of not being able to communicate in English. And not only that was the fear of an accent, because of course my parents, like I said before, my parents did know English, but they did have a thick accent and they saw the way people judged that accent. So they of course wanted me to have an American accent to, you know, make it easier for myself. So yeah, it is a struggle, and like the communication skills are there. Whether you think you learned them or not, I do believe they're there, even if you only spoke one language in your household. So, you know, just to validate your experience of bilingualism.
Nancy, can I add something really quick? You brought up ESL, and I, of course, was like triggered. Just knowing the education system in the US, I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and when I was placed in ESL, I was in ESL up until 8th grade. I passed the test multiple times, but putting students in ESL obviously is meant to help them learn this English language, but it also suppressed your identity and also suppressed you actually feeling that your home language is of value. And so when you would, I would go on the playground after I had to be the only kid in ESL, and students will be like, oh, well, why weren't you hanging out with us? And then you have to explain to them like, hey, I grew up speaking a different language. I do speak a different language at home, but that isolation factor really kept a lot of the students who spoke multiple languages from really appreciating, their language, because this ESL program told you, you are different. You're not going to make it should you not go through this program. And so I just really appreciated you bringing that up, because it's a real experience too.
Yes. And to follow you on this tangent quickly, like that is so validating. Also talking about, students, because sometimes, you are in a group, you are in a city or a school where there's a lot of people from your immigrant group. So you might want to talk to each other in different languages. And I remember that also being suppressed of, I had teachers where they would not allow you to speak any other language than English. If you were to try to speak to another person in Swahili, they'd be like, no, only English here. So it was, suppressive of like your culture, and it did make it harder. But I think as we grew up, I want to say as we grew up, we did, begin to flourish and really embrace our culture. So I'm really excited for that for us. Let me keep going because I'm already looking at the time. We're already at 1:41 and there's so many good questions to ask. But I really want to ask this one, talking about bilingualism and speaking for our parents and being advocates. It's sometimes different for us in terms of our traditional culture and our roles from our own ethnicity. Because our parents came from one place or one culture expecting a certain thing out of us, but then moved us to the US, which is the focus of education, without maybe considering how that difference in culture might affect us. So my question is, how did the US education system complement or contradict your role within your culture? Your role as, the eldest daughter or the eldest son, or maybe the youngest child. If anyone wants to jump in first, I will let them jump in.
I can go. So I guess something that came to my mind right away is just the intersectionality of like race and sex and, like belief and culture and everything, right? And in my culture, we're like Hmong, right? So it's a male dominant culture. And so with that being said, a lot of time Hmong women, they don't have the opportunities, right? Or they're not giving the opportunities to be able to do things. So, and I do want to put out there, I am the oldest, right? So with that, it also, depending on where you are in the line of family, I feel like that also says a lot about your responsibilities. And so I think with that being said, like a lot of time I can't stay after school, right? I can't get all of those tutoring. I can't play sports. You can't join oars. Can't be a part of the speech team. And we know how important those are to build out skills outside of the academic, right? Outside of the classes. So I think with the system, I think that it was hard, right? Especially with how I grew up and the culture that has been put in place. Um, it didn't really. It was challenging. You know, it was challenging to navigate. And so that was the role that culture and I think gender played in my education.
Yes, and I agree with that a lot. I am the second eldest, but I like to claim the eldest role, because everyone assume like I act like I am the eldest. But it's very true within our culture, the eldest daughter, I'm expected to take care of people. I'm expected to take care of family, whenever they need me. And it is interesting going through the education system where it is, beneficial to do these extracurricular activities, to, different clubs and sports and such. And you're told to do them to help your resume, to help your college application. But how do you do that when I'm also expected to go home and take care of, my brother who's 10 years younger than me, and I got to go home and help him with his homework. So I can't stay after to do those things, and just navigating that, and the constant conflict with my parents of, oh, you need to take care of this and this in the house. And I'm like, well, you told me to pursue education. I'm taking these IB AP classes. They're kicking my butt, and I have all this homework to do, and you're saying I've still got to, run a household. It's almost impossible. So I do agree with that eldest daughter, eldest daughters unite, because it was hard. It's really hard. Did anyone else want to add to this question before I jump into something else?
Sure, I can quickly add. I'm 4 of 5. But I feel like I'm 5, like 5 sometimes, and I feel like I'm the oldest at times. But what I wanted to say is that it really felt like I lived 2 different lives. When I went to school, I was a very different person, and then when I came home, I was also a very different person. But then at school, I would never let people know about what was going on at home in terms of me just living in my culture. And so it made me understand that I had to like balance and manage life very differently, and was asked to do that earlier on in my life, especially since my mom passed away when I was 8 years old. So with 3 girls in the household, we are essentially the mothers of the household. And so being able to just realize you wake up not at 6 a.m., you wake up at 5 a.m. to make sure you have food on the table for your father. You make sure, all of these things are in place. And then my dad didn't have the opportunity to go to high school, so he didn't even know extracurricular activities were part of the process. He didn't even realize, that is something that would help, an individual or a student, be successful later on. And so it actually really contradicted 100% what was happening at school. And I think it made me feel so guilty and so jealous for majority of my lifetime of others, and especially white people, because I lived in a predominantly white area. That jealousy and that guilt just was really hard. And so you lived in that space, and I did personally for such a long time.
Yes, and that transitions to my next question of, dealing with those emotions, because most times we do not talk about this within our own household. But I'll start with you, Winnie. So, many students go to school without discussing it, but how did you manage emotions and, also making social connections within school? And, when you went to St. Olaf, it's a residential school. How did you deal with homesickness and belonging? And, we'll slowly tie into my question about imposter syndrome later, but how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I feel like I could spend a whole day talking about navigating St. Olaf College. But what I will say is that I knew what I was getting myself into. And so I knew that I grew up and, lived in an environment where there was white people around me. So when I visited St. Olaf, I was like, okay, this isn't abnormal. This is something that I'm familiar with. I think navigating the college helped me to realize that I was an other more than the experiences that I had at home. So for example, I didn't even know I was first generation. I didn't even know I was low income. I didn't have any TRIO programs to help me throughout high school. I just felt very alone in the process. And then when you get to a place like St. Olaf College where there's wealth surrounding you, you're like, oh, I didn't know my life was so different from other people. The one thing that I will say is that going to a school like St. Olaf made me to feel more empowered about me being a Black woman, me being South Sudanese. And I think that helped me to weed out this preference that I had in terms of performance of my identity, because I knew I was surrounded by white people. So that navigation didn't happen until college. And I think I became more of a child in college than I actually became an adult, because I felt like my youth was taken away from me from having to live in such a dual world. So many different things, but that navigation really did happen, and having people around you who share similar experiences or understand that, whoa, I grew up a little different than everybody else here, really, really helped. It helped to affirm significantly. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I could easily go off on that tangent of, feeling like my childhood was robbed, but I won't. I want to pass this question on to Louise, because I know we've talked about this before, and I know Louise went to St. Thomas, so it's, closer to home, but still, you can still be close to home and still not feel at home. So if you want to talk about your experiences, Louise.
Yeah, so for me it was more of like, it was a shock, because in high school there was a lot more diversity, and I felt at home. I felt like I could talk to anybody, I could be myself. At St. Thomas, I felt like I almost had a chip on my shoulder, and it was kind of hard navigating and trying to figure things out, especially because, you know, there was 10% diversity and everybody else was white with money. It was just it was hard trying to navigate when it was out of the norm of what I was used to. So I would just focus on helping other people instead of being on campus, because I didn't like being on campus. So instead of being on campus, I would go out and volunteer for my hours for Page. I would go to a community I felt more comfortable with, which probably wasn't the best idea, but in my head, I felt like if I was helping other people, I was helping myself in a way, because I was helping I was volunteering at a Spanish immersion school, and giving hope to those kids was more important than me feeling comfortable at school. But then later on, I started to realize that I got to figure out how to manage both. So I was involved, but I wasn't as involved as I should have been first year. So second year, I started going to like more organizations instead of just staying at the ones I felt more comfortable with. I
Yeah,
talked to more people. It was just
yeah.
navigating through a tough time, I guess, in a sense.
Yeah, I can really relate with your experience. I just kept to myself at St. Ol. I also went to St. Ol. Kept to myself because I just didn't want to deal with it. But then, towards the end, I'm like, this is not benefiting me. I do need to connect with the people on campus as well. So it definitely is a struggle, but it's a really good transition. And I think it really does, help you in the end. Because like when he said, it made me confident by the end of who I was, and I really hope that that's the experience for a lot of people, is they at least, benefit in terms of confidence in themselves by the end of it. My next question, I want to start with Amira, because you're currently in school, talking about, these roles and being in our family. How much does your family impact your decision on, one, when you were searching for colleges, and then for you choosing your major, and then for the rest of my panel to consider, how did it affect your career path? But if Amira can start this one.
Awesome. Yeah, at least I want to start with career path. I think in high school or just growing up, I think the main option were like engineer, lawyer, doctor. Like those are the only options that you could be looking at. So for me, someone that had broken that barrier was my sister when she was still engineer, but she was more into computer science. So when my sister started to pursue that path, I think that was the realization for my parents that there's other things out there. So then, but then they were like, oh, you should look into computer science. Your sister's doing it. So then it kind of shifted gears. But for me, I think definitely at a young age, I was always interested in healthcare. So when I had voiced that to my parents, it's already that automatic assumption that, oh, Amir wants to be a doctor. So I think with that, entering like high school and college, I was kind of just at a crossroads. I'm like, am I actually interested in being a doctor? I know I want to pursue something in healthcare. So for me, I needed to take the time and opportunity to see and view other healthcare professions and see what I was really passionate about. And if I wanted to continue on the path of being pre-med and becoming a doctor, which I am. So more so to the college search, definitely my parents had their view of colleges were like, oh, all the prestigious schools like the Ivy Leagues, Big Ten, like schools they saw in the news. They're like, those are the schools you should be applying to. So when I told them I was applying to Carleton, they're like, where is that? And then it was my trio advice. So I was in trio upward bound. It was my trio advisor that talked to my parents and explained that Carleton's like the Harvard of the Midwest, as we call it. And then I think from there, my parents were kind of set on me like, okay, if you want to go to Carleton, you can go there or whatever. So, but I was happy that I think that they understood my decision after like someone else had been also like taking the time to explain it. So that was important to me. And then choosing my major, I think my parents really didn't, I didn't have that much of a conversation with my parents in terms of choosing my major, more so because my parents, I think with the system here at Carleton and being a liberal arts school, and I was still taking so many other different classes, they were just kind of like, not confused, I wouldn't say confused, but like there were just points in times where I was like, I wouldn't fully explain how I was deciding to choose my major. So with me choosing bio, it was my decision. So I was just passionate about that once I chose that decision and then voiced that to my parents. So I think a lot of my at least familial impacts on my decisions in terms of like college and career readiness have been more so like now at this point in time, like making the decision and then having that conversation with my parents after it's already done.
Yeah, nice. I like how you mentioned, when your sister, kind of broke the mold just a little bit and went into computer science. And then your parents were like, oh, you can do computer science too. I think I can't speak for every parent, but I think there's something about following that well-known path. Because once one sibling does it, once one cousin does it, then it's like, oh yeah, you can follow along with what the other person did. Because of course, I didn't become an engineer or a doctor, so my parents were like, what are you doing? But they see me enjoying my job. They see, me doing things that I'm super passionate about, and they see the work that I do, and they see, how beneficial it is for the people I work with. And so now, they're a little less stressed with my younger siblings where, okay, yeah, you could go get an education degree. That's an option now. So I feel like once they see that it's possible for you to have a good job life, I think it's, more acceptable. But yeah, I want to pass this question on to Payong. How did your family impact your, decision on, your path through college and career?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I really do agree with what Andy Amir said about, like for immigrants, family and refugee parents, all they really know is doctor, right? And teachers, and those are the things they see. And so as I'm reflecting, right, about like, okay, what do they even know what I do right now? Like, do they even know what I do as a director and running this program? And they're proud, right? They're proud to see that we are sitting in the office, right? White collar, because they're blue collars, right? And so they're proud because they're like, oh, they're doing something, they can have an education. But I don't even think my parents really understand what I do. They don't understand. And it's okay, right? It's okay, because I think that to your point, Nancy, they know I'm happy, right? They know I'm happy. I love doing what I'm doing. I'm impacting, our community. But I think with my parents, I think I'm just fortunate enough for them to not push me. I see a lot of students that come through my program and college that parents really put that expectation on their student or their child, right, to really pursue those engineering job, right, the doctor job, the very like jobs that they hold to a pedestal. And I think that sometimes for the student it's really stressful, and sometimes the it doesn't match, right? The interest doesn't match, and the academic doesn't match. And so at that point, what do we do, right? And so I see that happening a lot, but in my own experience, I know that my parents didn't push me. They were happy for me. They wanted me to do things, so I was fortunate in that sense. And I'm thankful that they're able to fulfill those basic needs for me, right? Like the safety, making sure that I have a house and some food, some food, things like that. But yeah, so I think that's how they help me. And I really just had to sit down with myself and say, okay, let me find out what really works for me, right? At the end of the day, this is my life, right? And I think they know that. So what really works for me um, is how they impacted my career, I guess.
Yeah, yes. And I mean, I love to hear that. Yes, they might not know exactly what we do, but as long as at least see a smiling face when I'm talking about work, it's okay. And yeah, and then I wanted to also ask Andy this question because I know the common theme is once you get to the youngest, the parents start to let off their expectations a bit. But did your family also, impact what you chose to do? Because you did say you were the first to go straight out of high school into college. So did your family really have an impact on that?
I would say it wasn't a big impact. I would say that with my older siblings, since they never went, there was no bar for them to expect. Um, but they were always engaged. Like how Poyong said that they didn't know what was going on, but they were always engaged. Like now that I'm working, my dad would ask me like twice a week, "What are you up to?" And it's getting harder to explain what I'm doing now, like because as you move up, you're doing more tasks and you're doing this. That's not simple. That's not like being a doctor or an engineer. You're doing this more difficult task, but that's impacting me in a positive way. They're asking questions and then they're trying to stay engaged. They might not know how, but they're engaged.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. I love to hear that they're asking questions. I think my parents have stopped asking questions at this point. They just know I work in education, and that's what they tell their friends. And so, it's okay. That's fine by me. Did anyone else want to add to this question before I move on? Yep, that's all right with me. So now talking more into, careers, and you're working hard in school. I think a lot of us, we've already said this, that, hard work, good grades lead to a good job. Do you believe that good grades and hard work will guarantee a job? Whoever wants to start first.
I can go first. I'm a big believer that I don't think college is for everybody. I think that whatever path you may, I think the society has pushed us to think that college is the end all be all, but I don't think that's right. Um, but I do think college is beneficial in so many ways, and that I think being first gen or second gen students, I would have never been where I am without going to college. So for me, it was beneficial, but I don't think it's for everybody else. So the question of do you think hard work relates to a good job? I think more so. So my job is more related to networking. So I think knowing people and being more communicative and being in spaces that um, are where you're learning to communicate and learning how to interact with different people and different cultures is more important, I think. So.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because networking is not really taught in classes. You can't test well in that. So, but you're obviously good at your jobs. And so how does that correlate with grades? And it doesn't really, not always grades are a direct relation to, a good job and what you're probably going to do in the future. I think, I don't know if I saw, did someone raise their hand or did I imagine that? I might have imagined that. But I want to pass this question on to Amir since you're still in school. Do you think that, good grades will guarantee you a good job, especially for someone pursuing medicine?
Yes and no. I feel like good grades gets you like that hard work plus good grades gets you in the door, but there's so many other factors to like actually fully get through the door to get to where you want to go. So, and like, I feel like I face that a lot when just applying to internships or trying to find summer jobs or like winter break internship programs and stuff like that. Like the good grades may get me in the door, but like doing the interview or showing them that I'm something past just like my academics, like what I do in my free time and my extracurriculars is what has helped me in terms of like networking and professional development in order to get that internship or in order to get that position to in the future get a job position. So 50-50.
Yeah, yes, I'm liking this theme of networking because I feel like that's something that's not talked a lot, between our parents of like, how do you get a job? And to them, it is the grades. And, going through that process of trying to get a job, it's not so much the grades. No one has asked me about my grades in an interview, I think, ever since my first internship. So I'm not sure if that's too true, but I want to pass this question to Luis, who just recently acquired a job. How important was it for you to have good grades to acquire that job, or was it something else?
I think it was more important, and I think it only came up in my first internship. They were like, "So why do you have the GPA you have?" Like she asked it, not really knowing how I was going to answer, but I feel like she asked it wanting to know why I went the way I went and how I ended up with that GPA. Because when I was first starting out, I was so scared of going in debt that I focused on working, and then I would let my grades slip. And she would be like, "Oh yeah, I understand that." And she was understanding because it wasn't easy getting an engineering degree for her either. And
Mhm.
being a woman in STEM, uh, she kind of related a little bit as feeling like she had a chip on her shoulder too, just like a POC would have a chip on their shoulder in school, and more so a woman POC as well. It was just hard to just not. It was hard to go in debt because I saw how hard it was for my parents being in debt. So she understood, but it's mostly how you sell yourself. It's honestly how you present yourself to the person and how honest they see you, because you could be the smartest person in the room, but if you have no personality, no people skills, and can't really communicate on a different level, it won't get you any further than, okay, thank you for coming into the interview.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really true. I think someone for the first time, I want to say when I was a freshman in college for the first time, told me people hire people who they want to work with. And to me, that blew my mind. I thought we were hiring who had the highest GPA. That's what I was been told this entire time. To be told, like, no, I want someone who I can work with. That really changed my viewpoint of how people get jobs. And it made sense because I'm not going to hire someone that I can't get along with and can't actually produce things with, because you can be the smartest person in the room, but if you can't work with people, it's not, going to be beneficial to that team of people. So I really love that you brought that up. And so my next question then goes, finally, I get to talk about imposter syndrome. I've been leading up to this, but we've talked about, good grades and how emphasized those good grades were. And I wanted to ask, do you think there's a connection between focusing on that letter grade and not necessarily what you actually learn, just focusing that you get a good grade, and imposter syndrome? And I know Payang mentioned this, I want to say the most, so I want to pass the question to her.
I almost think it's twofold, right? Because I feel like the grades kind of help validate you a little bit that, hey, maybe I am smart. Maybe I do know a little bit about, this, right? But I think at the end of the day, when you sit with yourself and you start to question, like, do I really know this, right? Do I really know this? I think that that's what get the best of us, right? Even like today, I'm like, do I really deserve this role? Do I even know what I'm doing? And I think this happens all the time. And I think that the connection there for me, I feel like it's just a validation, right? And then you have to be reminded of like all the experiences you have led you to this point. You're not an imposter, right? You are successful, you are skillful, you have the experience, you have the knowledge, you have something that somebody doesn't, and this is, you deserve this, right? You're so deserving of this. And I think that that's so important for people of color like us, first gen students, students who are immigrants, students who are refugees, that we make sure that we value ourselves, right? We put ourselves in a highlight because we are always fighting, right? We're always advocating. And sometimes it's so tiring to be fighting, so exhausting to be fighting all the time. And I think at the end of the day, we got to make sure that we love ourselves, right? right? And we recognize our success and our failures, you know, sometimes that happens, and it's okay, you know, just pick us up, back up and go. So there is definitely a connection. You know, and I think that most of it is just a validation. But again, imposter syndrome is a real thing, right? It happens all the time. Some days I wake up feeling like, you know, crap, whatever. And some days you just keep going. And you know, it's a real thing. And to all of the students out there, like, it's okay, right? Find a mentor, find somebody who you can talk to. Paige is here to support you. Trio's here as well. And I'm going to pass it back to you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I almost forgot to preface, but just to define imposter syndrome for everyone, because not always everyone knows what that term means. We're talking about that feeling of, I'm not supposed to be in this room. I don't think I'm qualified to be here. You might have, you know, tested well, you've gotten into this college. Someone said like, oh yeah, you can be in this higher level class, but you get there and you feel like, I don't think they picked the right person. So that's what we're talking about with imposter syndrome. And I love what you said about validating. You made me feel validated just now. Even I still get imposter syndrome. I'm still young in my career, and I still have times where I'm like, someone left me to put together a webinar and to get people together. And someone let me write these questions and pose them to people. And I still think that's crazy. I'm not sure I would have let myself do that. But, you know, that validating and finding someone to validate you is super important. You might think like, oh, I've got this, because, you know, we get that narrative from our parents. You got it. You can do it. Like, there isn't that much affirming that you might question yourself. But, you know, it is necessary to have that person say, I do have this. You've got this. You worked hard for it. Did anyone else, you know, want to join in on this? They think, yeah, go ahead, Amira.
Awesome. I think I really relate to this now, because I'm like, being in school, being at a predominantly white institution, and like as a first generation low income student, I think coming here already, and I'm like seeing all these students that are like, not only like, of course, like all these students are like coming from these like different schools that are at the top of their class, and being like really STEM focused. So I'll be in some of my classes. Like right now I'm in cell biology, and I'm the only Black person in that class out of like 30 something people. So for me, having that experience when I feel like I'm not understanding something, and just like all my peers are kind of like just continuing to move ahead, that plays a lot into imposter syndrome and how I feel, like how I'm doing in my classes in comparison to my peers. So when it comes to like things like that, it's more so like the realization of like like efficacy and self-confidence, just like you're not working against any other people except yourself. So I think, and you can say, like, I've said that a lot to myself, but it's still hard to actually acclimate to that, especially when you're always continuing to be put in that situation where you are the only person of color in a classroom, or just being in that space. So just thinking about that, I feel like it's an ongoing like problem, and it's, I think, still just trying to figure out how to establish that you're just working for like only against yourself and not anybody else.
Yes, and I can relate to that. You know, as of course everyone else here, being the only in a class really will make you question whether or not you're supposed to be in that class. And I know, Winnie, you mentioned this, so I'm going to pass the question to you next. You mentioned, you know, that experience in St. Olaf, you know, oh my goodness, these people have so much more money than I've ever seen. This is like, I haven't experienced this before. Am I supposed to be here? What would you say your experience was, you know, with imposter syndrome within St. Olaf?
I would just say imposter syndrome follows me everywhere, even in my professional role. It's not something that is ever going to go away, unfortunately. I think we need to balance out what society has expectations for us, and then how we support and elevate ourselves. At St. Olaf, you know, it was everywhere I went. I think for me, it was a little different because I was a music major. I was always one of the only in the music department. I was one of the only, and I think a lot of people just associated my identity with my experience. So why are you here? You're here because you're the only Black girl who is singing in this choir. You're here because you're the only this, right? So people use the only as a negative, you know, asset towards who I am. And it just is unfortunate that we have to just learn how to navigate that as individuals. And I think one of the things that I wish St. Olaf did a better job was preparing me for the workforce, preparing me for future imposter syndrome that will exist. I mean, it's great to go to an institution that allows for you to champion who you are, teach you to, you know, think about equity, think about inclusivity. But then when you walk into the workplace, it's reverse psychology. Actually, it's not the reality. You have to fight against generational differences. You have to fight against systems and policies. And so it really just it exists not only in your physical being, but it might exist in just the way that you show up. And so what I try to do is just live in the best capacity that I can and show up where I can. And, you know, don't command attention, because attention can also be bad. In some instances, you get tokenized for being, you know, the person who's like best energy, you know, like people gravitate to you towards you because of something that really is like inviting. And so I just really think that imposter syndrome, sadly, you know, follows us in various capacities. It doesn't even have to be about us being people of color. You could say, you know what, I was an English major and now I am in the medicine field. That hands down is a single, you know, example of imposter syndrome. So it follows us, but I think, you know, the beauty of it is helping us to become stronger individuals and recognizing when we do feel like an imposter rather than having people place that upon you. So that's what I would say. It's just that I just had to learn the hard way.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And I want to tie back to what Payong said about, you know, having trio in these places and just really encouraging our students to find those places like trio if you haven't already. I was not aware of trio, I think, until my senior year at St. Elmo. And by then, you know, it was probably too late to actually sign up, but I still was in the office all the time. So, you know, really look for those spaces sooner than later, because they really do benefit your growth and just, you know, validating your experience and having that person to, you know, talk with about this. Because I think one of the worst things about imposter syndrome is you feel like you're not adequate to be there, but you also feel like you're the only one who's not adequate to be there. And the fact is, probably half that room feels like they're not supposed to be there. So having that community is really important. And I am running towards the end of my time, so I want to ask one more question, and I will start with Winnie. These are more for my panelists, you know, already in their role already. So, you know, I want to go back to, you know, talking about our culture and how it affects us, the way we show up. So considering your role within your culture, you know, we talked before about being, you know, the eldest daughters. Does it mesh with the expectations put on you in the workplace? So does those roles, you know, I can say for myself, you know, being the eldest daughter, I come into the office ready to clean. Is that always appropriate or normal? No, I grew up with it. So I will, you know, wash and clean things. And depending on the office I'm in, that's a little weird, you know, especially if they hire someone to do that. They're like, why are you taking out the trash? And I'm like, it needs to be taken out. I have to take out the trash. And, you know, here at this office, you know, being a nonprofit office, it's more homey. And so it's not as weird here. It's like, oh, thanks for taking out the trash rather than something weird. But Winnie, if you want to share your experience in the workplace.
Well, I'm in a virtual workspace, but when I think about culture, I usually never try to bring it to the workspace because I always feel threatened to do so, right? Is this the proper time for me to bring my culture into the workspace? Can I express my culture in the workspace? And I think people are less invested in wanting to know about people's different cultures. And so I always, you know, become very cynical of like, oh, we're celebrating this, we're celebrating that. But who is it for? Is it actual for the people who are from this culture, or is it for white people who are not aware, you know, about their cultures? And so that always is just a really challenging place to be. But I always tell people that I'm like a professional code switcher. You know, I don't want to give anyone a reason to make me feel little. And so what I do is just protect myself in that space before I invite people to realize, okay, this is my culture. This is who I am. Because to me, my culture is very sacred. I love it so much. I don't want anyone to make me feel minimized about my culture in the way that the education system did. And so I do have this this like sense of protection and when it comes to who I am and my culture. And I'm very proud of it because again, it makes me feel fully in ownership of, my culture. And I always have like a happy place about it. But I do appreciate when people do welcome, you bringing yourself into the culture. I think another example is that I'm singing in a local choir, and the choir director asked me if I could share something about how my family, my culture celebrates holidays. And it's like, yep, very different perspective that I bring. My mom is Muslim, my dad is Catholic, I was baptized Lutheran. So what is celebration of holiday? But that invitation means so much more than the expectation of you having to be your culture. And so I really just, like I said, enjoy when people invite you and welcome you into the space. Other than that, I want to protect it because it's so meaningful to me.
Yes, and I love that. I love protecting it for yourself and keeping some things for yourself. I love to hear that. I want to pass this question on to Andy and then Payong. Andy, you're in the nonprofit sector, so how does that, work for you compared to, EAB, which is technically corporate company, correct? Yeah. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so being working nonprofit, we're anti-poverty nonprofit, so we do a lot of work with, financial supports. We do the Head Start stuff. So me working here, my role and my culture, I was a diversity hire, and I know that coming into it. But that's the reason why I'm here, is to make sure that the work that we're doing is impactful and it's culturally inclusive, and that it is not it's trauma informed, and it's everything that we come into. So with my work, I'm really am like protective of like always trying to express different views, different cultures, my cultures. I can't really necessarily speak for other cultures, but I know my culture has a big role in whatever decision we make too. So that's why I'm here. So I'm always, if I have the chance, I'm gonna bring in my cultural food into the office because we're gonna eat that today. So I'm always trying to share that there's differences in my workspace. So I'm not scared. I'm not afraid of navigating white space and the space that we're working with. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's it's really cool to hear to using your culture purposely to help the people you're serving, which for me is also very similar. I will share that Amir was I want to say, yeah, you're the very first scholar that I ever met. And we connected because we went to the same high school. We're both, African females, and she went to Carleton, I went to St. Olaf, but it's only across the river. And so seeing, myself serve, someone who reminds me of me, really, validates what I'm doing, and especially in the nonprofit sector, it really does validate why I do what I do, and it's on purpose that I bring my culture into my work. And lastly, and let me not talk too much, I want to pass this on to Payong.
No, I think you're so important, Nancy, your experiences as well. It's so important for us to hear. I think for me, I'm fortunate to work in education. I feel like although there's a lot of things that needs to change, right? We already know how problematic education already is. But I think that for me personally, we cannot separate culture, right? And our identity. We can't leave that at the door when we walk into a workplace. We really can't. We can't. You are different, and your differences is your power. That is your power. That is what makes you unique. So for me, I'm like, embrace it. Just embrace it. If it's not matching the workplace, maybe that's not a good fit for you. I feel like we're going to be at a dissonance all the time. You're always going to be fighting against yourself all the time, and that's so exhausting. Like, we only have one life, y'all. Like, come on, let's make it worth it, right? And I think a lot of time I think about professionalism, right? What does professionalism look like? Our parents are blue collar workers, right? They don't know what professionalism look like. They don't know that, hey, when we go to the office, how do we dress a certain way, right? So that we can earn the respect, because I know that we are not supposed to judge people by the clothing they wear, but that's not true. Judgments are made every time, every second of every day. So I think a lot of it comes down to like, what is a professional, and how do you have professional etiquettes, right? And how do you really match that into your culture so that you are professional, but yet you are true. You are true, you're authentic, you are true to your identity and what you're passionate about.
Yes. We do bring our culture in no matter what. I do believe that intentionally or unintentionally, there's some part of us we're still bringing into the office. And I love those intentional parts, because there will be days I intentionally wear something with African print on it because I know I'm going to see students today. So I want them to see me being my authentic self. Now, do I wear that on a normal day? No. I don't normally even wear blazers. I think most times it's just a simple shirt or a sweater or something. But sometimes it can be used to the advantage of the people you're with to help them. So yeah, I love to hear that. Thank you guys so much for your responses. I'm going to start wrapping this up here. This has been a really good discussion, and sadly there's a lot of questions we didn't get to, but maybe at another later point, maybe there might be a part two. I want to ask the audience to please submit any questions that they have in the chat or the Q&A box, so we can answer them. We do already have one question in the Q&A box from Rachel, who is asking, so she says, I really feel unqualified in school and my internships. Is there any advice that you guys might have? And I will let you guys, jump in, whoever has advice for her.
Rachel, thank you for the question. I think a lot of time what I do when I'm feeling kind of like unfit, right? Is I made a list. I make a list of like what my strengths are, right? What are my strengths, what I'm really good at, and this helps me validate it. Because at times we always feel low, but I think that always kind of reminds you why you're qualifying, why you're there. They pick you because of something, they picked you, okay? And I think that's something you should be proud of, right? Something out of everybody, they picked you. Okay, know that first of all, you are qualified. And so then it's just to help yourself make those little notes to remind yourself. Sometimes we are our worst critics, like seriously, we really are. And so make notes, connect with folks who are in similar positions. Again, you're not alone. And then find mentorship, reach out to Page Education, right? Share your experiences. So those are some of the things that I think you could do, and then open up to the panelists who see what other strategies you can also use.
Do any other panelists have advice?
This is mainly for the internship aspect. I think another big thing is don't be afraid to ask your supervisor for validation or to ask why they chose you. Working in my career, I was always, again, imposter syndrome, feeling like like I shouldn't be here, but I wasn't afraid to ask to my supervisor, like why I'm here, why they need me, and it was always genuine conversations. That conversation helped me be validated, helped me feel like I was wanted there.
Yes, cool. Asking questions is so important, and I feel like it's so repeated. I feel like I hear it all the time, but people still don't ask enough questions. Ask about anything and everything, and there's no such thing, as a dumb question. So always feel free to ask questions. That's a really good one, Andy. Did anyone else have any advice? If not, we have another question. So this one's directed for Winnie. It says, I love, Winnie, you mentioned code switching. How do you code switch in a professional setting?
Another question that could spend multiple times and years talking about this. But when I think about code switching, I think about dismantling the perceived stereotypes of individuals. So when I think about, for me as a Black woman, I'm seen as a Black woman, like Black American. I'm not seen as an African woman. Like a lot of people mistakenly assume that my identity is part of these stereotypes. And so when I think about, the workspace and how I show up, it comes and it stems from that level of respect that my parents have instilled in me. And so, yes, I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I, understand that culturally and socially, I have a very different dynamic, but some people don't want to see that in the workspace. Some people are going to to use that against you because they might think that you're silly. They might think that you're unprofessional. And, you know, for me, it's always about the way that I articulate myself. So people are like, you're just so eloquent. You're such a great speaker, blah, 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 blah. And it just goes to show that I'm trying really hard to meet people where they're at, but instead they don't really realize that I'm working 3 times as hard to just exist, because one part of Winnie is not going to be sufficient enough in one area. Another part of Winnie is also not going to be sufficient enough. And so when I am in different spaces, I recognize, one, where does respect lie? It lies within myself and then those around me. And then how can I interact with them? And so sometimes it's meeting them where they're at. And so that's why code switching does come in some beneficial ways and not so beneficial ways for individuals. But sometimes it does help you just to navigate that workspace and then also create that level of protection for yourself, especially when people are so prone to microaggressions 100%. And so it's a mechanism of survival that I think many of us have learned to utilize, not embrace, but utilize in the workspace as we interact with one another.
Yes, and I like what you said, Winnie, about, you know, protecting yourself, because I can agree, code switching in ways not only just protecting my culture, just protecting myself in general, working with students, especially looking younger and looking like a student. It was, you know, for me, I always had to code switch into a more professional style, because it's so easy to, you know, not give myself that authority level. Because if I'm talking how I normally do with friends, then it's like, oh, this is a buddy situation. It's like, no. Especially being a high school math teacher, I really needed to set my authority. So it can protect your culture, it can protect yourself from issues with the people you work with. And, you know, in general, it can be helpful, and it is a tool. And there's also, you know, protecting your culture, which I do like. I do code switch sometimes to, you know, keep it to myself. Like there's certain things that it's okay to keep it to yourself. You don't always have to be the person to, you know, be open about what you do at home and what you eat. A lot of my foods, if it's very difficult to make, I'm not telling you about it, because I'm not offering to make it for you. So I'm going to keep that one for myself. And for me, I keep my, everyone knows my English name, but I keep my native name to myself, because I don't want to hear people mispronounce it. And, you know, there's things I do keep to myself, but, you know, there's things I'm willing to share. Like I will talk about other things, and just knowing when you can code switch and finding the right environments. And really, to answer your question, it's just practice and time, learning where and when to use what. It just takes time, and it is a painful process, sad to say. You will learn sometimes the hard way what not to say in a certain setting. So
this is why I wish higher education embraced the social and cultural aspect of preparing individuals to go into the professional workspace. I think that these are just standards that have been naturally set and constructed by, you know, our society. And so it does make it challenging for us to realize that we have to step into another level or another space in which we never asked ourselves to be in. And so I definitely think that protection mode is just important, but also we have to heal through all of the internalized trauma that we've all experienced. And so while you're elevating yourself professionally, you're also spending that time recognizing that there is a lot of stuff that is happening internally as well. So I do appreciate, you know, you asking that question.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And so it is now 2:30. So I will end this. I didn't see any more questions. So thank you for everyone that did ask questions. But to my panel, thank you so much for joining us. And my final question for each one of you, I will start with Winnie and we'll go on through everyone else, is what is one thing you want our audience to take away from this discussion?
The one thing that I would love for everyone to take away from this is that don't be afraid of being yourself. As much as you recognize that there are different ways to navigate the world, different ways to navigate the professional world, be yourself and find a way to learn how to advocate for yourself. If it's not yourself, find others that can do that advocacy for you. And I think once you have that understanding of advocacy, the more that you'll be able to connect with people and others. But that celebration also needs to be internalized. If people aren't outwardly, celebrating you, always internally celebrate yourself. As, was said before, you're there for a reason, you're here for a reason, you exist, for a reason, but always embrace that internally and never let anyone tell you less.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. All right, we're going to ask Luis, what's one thing you would say you want our audience to take away?
Don't ever feel guilty about any of the positions you've ever been in. So like whether you're succeeding in life or whether you're getting good grades, don't feel bad about all the stuff you've accomplished, and don't feel bad about it in the sense of sometimes we feel a lot of guilt for succeeding when we can't bring our parents with us. And I feel like that's the biggest thing that holds us back sometimes, when we don't want to like soar higher without leaving people behind. But you have to focus on yourself first to help the people you want to bring up with you.
That's a really good. I'm so glad that you said that. I think a lot of students can connect with that. Next, let's go to Andy. What's one takeaway?
I guess, I mean, Luis and Wendy kind of said what I wanted to say, but yeah. But I think one thing I have to take away from this is go back into your workspace, your communities, and really discover your work on yourself, but work on your identity, and find those communities to help support you in whatever path you want to take. Really just find your way through all this stuff, because we all of us has been through these hardships and these experiences, and it'll be okay at the end. So just do your thing.
Love it. Thank you. And then let's go to Amira.
Yes, I think I really just want to echo a lot of what Winnie said, and really just emphasis of self-confidence and efficacy, especially when it comes to like a lot of these attendees who are in high school or in college. So like this career readiness aspect. So just knowing how to be your authentic self and knowing when to ask for those resources, because there's a lot of resources out there that are catering to you. So just seeking those out.
Yes, finding your resources. Thank you. And then of course, last but not least, Payang.
I'm like, okay, well, I've already said everything. But just to summarize it, be present, right? Be intentional in your journey, ask questions, and find a mentor. Find somebody who you can trust, who can help you grow, who can give you criticism, right? And so that you can grow and you can be better versions of yourself, and help you shine at your job and wherever you land in life, for sure. But then that's what I would say. Be present, be intentional, find yourself a mentor.
I love it. These are all great takeaways, and just thank you guys so much. I'm going to start my thank you spiel now. I thank you to all our panelists for being here today. Thank you for taking the time out to talk to us. I really do appreciate it, and I really genuinely mean it. I think people think once you've seen this that, oh, this wasn't that hard to put together. It's very hard to get more than 2 people in a room together. So I really do appreciate you guys being here and giving your input and sharing your stories with us. And it's very validating for all the students listening. And I'm excited for the students that will get to listen to the recordings later. I also want to say a big thank you to the Page Education Foundation and all the staff that have helped me through this. I did not write these questions by myself. I bounced it off of my coworkers, and they gave me their 2 cents. And just their help through this entire process. Each of our staff has helped me individually, and I just appreciate them so much. And, thank you for our audience for attending. Thank you for spending time with us this afternoon to, hear the opinions of other people. And I know we have a lot of different people in our audience than in my normal webinars. So I'm just so excited to have all these different people, listening and, taking this conversation back and, maybe discussing this with someone later on of what you heard and what you thought was interesting. So thank you to everyone. I'm so happy to have been a part of this and to have met you all. Last but not least, I also want to let our audience know that if they are high school students interested in being a part of the Page Education Foundation, that our application does open January 1st and it closes April 1st. And if you want more information to again visit our website at www.page-ed.org. Candace will leave it in the chat for anyone who wants to visit. And if you have any questions or comments, concerns, to please reach out to me at nancy@page-ed.org. Candace will also leave my contact information in the chat with email and phone number. But yes, thank you to everyone, and I will let you all go. I'll ask our panelists to stay on for a few more seconds after everyone leaves. But thank you everyone again for attending. And have a good evening. Evening? Yes.